Hello and welcome to the STEMCstudio channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the JSXGraph library from STEMCstudio. Now, the JSXGraph library is a library that was written by the University of Bayreuth in Germany, and it can be used for many things. One example here is interactive Euclidean explorations. You can use it for explaining simple concepts, or perhaps not quite so simple concepts such as the Riemann sum here. And you can even use it to render 2D physics models like these. Now, I'm not going to give you a full in-depth tutorial of JSXGraph. There is plenty of really good high-quality documentation on their website here. Here's JSXGraph. You can go to the API reference, and there are tons of examples. But what I am going to do is I'm going to start from the ground level in STEMCstudio, assume as little as possible, and show you the absolute essentials for getting JSXGraph running within STEMCstudio. I am going to give you a few little hints about how the JSXGraph API works, because I found this was very useful. I was explaining to somebody and the lights really just went on. So I'm going to show you the absolute basics for understanding the JSXGraph API. Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to head over here to the STEMCstudio homepage. Let's do a little cleanup here. And we'll clean up a few tabs, why not? There we go. All right, so we're going to start out with a brand new application. Let's call it, say, JSXGraph Essentials. And I'm going to start with what is a minimal application template. So in other words, it's not going to know anything about JSXGraph at the beginning. So let's click OK. And now we're in the editing workspace of STEMCstudio. Let's run the program, and we'll hide the documentation. And as you can see, all this program is really doing is writing hello world out to the output, the HTML output. So let's get rid of that and start with a clean slate. Okay, we're just about ready to go. The first thing that we're going to want to do is to actually make JSXGraph a dependency of STEMCstudio. And the way to do that is to go over to the project settings icon here in the File Explorer. Click it. Now, ignore all of these options at the top of the dialog. What we're interested in are the dependencies of the project. And we will notice that we already have DOM ready as a dependency. That's a library that is useful for ensuring that the DOM has been loaded, that the DOM content loaded event has actually happened. And we're already using that in the code. What we want is JSXGraph. So here's JSXGraph. And you can see it's the interactive 2D geometry plotting and visualization library. And we are going to select the latest version of that, which currently is 1.2.2. Now you'll notice that STEMCstudio defaults in what we call the upgrade mode, which is minor, which is to say that if there are upgrades to the minor version number of JSXGraph, then these will run automatically with this program. So let's click OK. And now we are ready to put in some STEMCstudio, in some JSXGraph specific code. Now, rather than start from scratch there, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to head over to the JSXGraph website. And I'm just going to go and steal a little bit of an example. Let's say steal the points example here. And we'll wait for the internet. And let's just take these two lines of code. Bring them back to STEMCstudio and drop them in here, which is the function that is called once the DOM is ready. We'll just format the code so we can see it a little bit more clearly. So never mind the error over here. That's just telling us that this variable p is declared, but we're not using it yet. Let's take a look at the output. We can see there is an error. the HTML container element JXG box is not found. And that's, of course, referring to this element ID. Okay, so how do we fix that? Well, the way we do that is we go over to the index.html file, and we need to add a div element here whose ID is equal to JXG box. Okay, once we've done that, you might have noticed that we're already showing the navigation that is associated with JSXGraph, but we're not seeing the rest of the diagram. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem is that we need to add some style to this particular div element to set the height and the width of the element. So we're going to make the height, say, 500 pixels, and we're going to make the width also 500 pixels. And lo and behold, we're starting to get some results. We can see a point appearing over here. We can see the copyright for JSXGraph appearing at the top, and the navigation has moved down here. So let's go back to our source code. Okay, and how do we change things here so that we can see, for example, the axis lines and things like that? Well, the way to do that is to change the attributes of the board. Okay, so you can see that this initBoard method here, if I hover over it, requires the element ID, and then it requires some attributes, which are the board attributes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drop us down a line here. And if I hit Control Spacebar in STEMCstudio, it knows to get the information for this API, and that a property that we can use is called axis. So I'm selecting that with a down arrow, hitting the Enter key, and then I just type : true. And lo and behold, our axes appear. Okay, so this is great. Now, you might have noticed in some of the previous examples that I was working with that there was a nice board around here. And the way that that is achieved is that JSXGraph actually ships with some built-in style sheets that STEMCstudio already has loaded for you. So let's go and use those style sheets. So we come over to our HTML, we put a class on our div element, and what we're going to do is we're going to put a class of JXG box. And there you go, lo and behold, we have a nice little border around our diagram. Now, personally, I think it's a little bit confusing that the class name here is actually the same name as the div, so I'm actually just going to change the name of our ID to diagram. Okay, I hope this will make it a little bit clearer for people who are sort of newer to STEMCstudio. As you can see, the errors come back. HTML container element JXG box is not found. We can fix that easily by just going here and typing in diagram. Okay, and we're back to where we were. All right, let's just put a few little finishing flourishes on this before we actually do an exploration of the JSXGraph API. First, you can see that we have this warning here saying that this variable is declared, but it's never read, it's never used. This is very easy to get rid of in STEMCstudio. We just don't use the variable, we don't create the variable. And then something else happens. We've got linting giving us some advice on how to improve our code here. And it's saying don't use the var keyword, use let or constant set. Now, since we never reassign to the board variable, we can make this const, which prevents reassignment. Okay, and there you go. Well, almost there you go. Apparently, we've got a little bit of trailing white space. We can get rid of that by formatting the document, or you can right-click to format the document. And there's even a keystroke for formatting the document. Let's see if we can find it. There we go, format document, Control-Shift-I. Okay, so let's do Control-Shift-I. I use that all the time. So as you can see, it's actually tidied up our code quite nicely, so it's a little bit more readable, and the linting error has gone away. I think one final thing that we can do is we can set the border here, the background, to be a different color from the board, just to sort of set it off a little bit. So we'll come into here to our style sheet, and we'll change this from being white, which is all F's, to some shade of gray. I'll use C, and there we go. So that is the essence of how to integrate JSXGraph with STEMCstudio. All right, so let's move on to talking a little bit about the API paradigm in JSXGraph. And knowing a little bit about this paradigm will make it easier for you to start using the JSXGraph API and to start using their documentation. So JSXGraph allows you to make constructions on the diagram, and by and large what you're doing is you're building on top of points. You might be creating lines on top of points, or you might be creating lines which are perpendicular to lines and things like that. But in all cases, the style of the method call that you create is very much the same. It's going to look a little bit like this board.createPoint one, except instead of saying the word point, we might be saying line or circle or something like that. It's always going to be followed by an array containing something or other, and that something or other depends upon what the kind of thing that you're creating. And then the final thing is there are often attributes that you can add that will customize the appearance of the element. So just to show you the attributes right now, I'm going to add an object here, which is the final parameter for the creation of the point. It's the point attributes, as you can see in the documentation here. And I'm going to just put my cursor there, and I'm hit Control Spacebar. And you can see that it allows us to change, for example, color, and fill colors and stroke colors and names and things like that. So I could, for example, change the name, and I could make that say alpha. I could change the color, so I'm just hitting Control Spacebar here, color, and I might want to make that say blue. Okay, and so forth. So that's just to illustrate that the way the API works is it's typically board.create something or other. The second parameter is always called the parents, okay, and which in other words is kind of like the thing that you're building off. And then the final thing are the attributes that change the appearance. These methods also return something. So if I'm trying to leave my mouse still over here, if you look at that, you can see it's returning a point. So I can assign whatever this creates to a variable in my program so that I can use that going forward. All right, so let's kind of like keep it a little simple. We'll change our name back to A, and let's create another point. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this line. It's the simplest way to do it. And let's put the point at the location, say 1, 2, something like that. And oops, we're off the diagram a little bit. So this is a good time to tell you a little bit about how this bounding box works. So the bounding box consists of 2 sets of coordinates. The first coordinate gives you the point, which is the upper left-hand corner of the diagram here. And the second pair of set of coordinates gives you the lower right point down here. So I'm going to set it up just to be symmetrical here. We'll make it go from -5, 5. So that's going to be the top left-hand corner to 5, -5. Okay, and that's the bottom right-hand corner. So now we've got a kind of like completely symmetrical diagram. Okay, so the next thing is just to illustrate how you build your diagram on top of previous elements in the diagram. And so to illustrate that, I'm going to do a line which is through the points A and B. Okay, so we start off by typing board. I hit dot. Okay, I know there's a create method in there somewhere, so I'm just going to type create. There it is, hit enter. Okay, and then this time I want to create a line, so that's a control spacebar I just did there. I type in line, and as you can see, line is there. Hit enter. And then I need the parents. Now, there are many options for what you can do for the parents, but in this example, let's go with the idea that we're going to build a line that goes through A and B. And so what we need are the points A and B. So I'm going to assign these point 1 to be point A. So intentionally decoupling myself from the name, but it's not really super important. So there's point 1, point 2, and I'm going to create a line, and it's going to go from point 1 to point 2. Okay, and there you go, it goes through. And unfortunately, it's defaulting to blue, so let's just change our point colors back to red here, so you can see them a little bit more easily. And now we can drag the points, and you can see that the line kind of follows them. So this is really the paradigm that I suppose is optimized for doing Euclidean constructions. I'll just format the diagram, just tidy things up a little bit. Okay, now, so I think we've kind of like covered one basic idea in the JSXGraph API, which is that you have a create method for creating things. The second argument is the element type. The first argument is the element type. The second argument is the parents, which, as you can see here, it might have been numbers, but it could also actually be points. I'm hovering over these. And it can be something else too, which I'll show you. Okay, and then the third attribute is generally the third argument is our attributes that can change the appearance of the line. So I think I can probably say this is dashed, and then I think, let's see, hover over this. Okay, so it's actually telling me that if I wanted to have a, let's say like medium dashes or something like that, I could use a 3. Okay, and I'll just tidy that up a little bit. Okay, but what else can you do in terms of setting the parents here? And this is kind of important if you're trying to create dynamic diagrams, especially when you're kind of like doing physics. Well, another option for creating a line is you can explicitly just give the coordinates, you know, like I can make this go through the origin. Okay, so that's we've kind of seen that before in the first example of creating this point, okay, where we were passing numbers in. But there's another thing that you can do, which is generally in places where you can pass in, say, a number, you can also pass in a function that returns a number. So for example, I might type a function, and this has to return a number. Now, to be sort of compatible with what I just typed in before, I would return 0. Of course, that's not very useful if your function is kind of like constant. But what I could do, for example, is I could say return a number that's coming from somewhere else in the code. So this may be a slightly artificial example, but I could say the point 1's x coordinate, okay? And now if I fill in the second one, and this time I return point 1's y coordinate, and I just done something a little bit silly. Okay, I've got a I put too many. Okay, what did I do wrong here? Okay, I think I need, this is where it's probably helpful actually, if Yeah, there you go. This is where it's kind of helpful to probably drop your code onto different lines to sort of organize it a little bit better, so you can see kind of what's going on here. So something more like that might be better. Let's just format it. So that might be a little bit more suggestive. Now, obviously, the functionality here is pretty much what I could have had if I just put 0.1 as the first argument here. But remember that there are going to be situations where you might be wanting to run your simulation off some kind of a model where the object that you want to put in here is not in fact a JXG point, but it's something else. Okay, and so this alternative way of doing it can be extremely useful. Believe it or not, that actually kind of covers the majority of what you need to know to really kind of like basically use STEMCstudio, to use JSXGraph and to sort of exploit it to the fullest in many different scenarios. There are only a few other things that you might want to know. So for example, you may be making changes where you sort of have to force the board to update, and the board does have an explicit update method. Just format there, get rid of that. So you can call board update at some point. Sometimes you might want to call a sort of board suspend update, something like that, while you make changes to objects, because you don't want it to be trying to refresh while you're making some changes. And then you would call a sort of board.unsuspend update at the end of that, and that would allow the board to be updated. There's a lot more to JSXGraph, obviously, and there, as I said, there's great documentation that will help you that. But I hope this will help you get started with the JSXGraph API, both from understanding how to use the API, but also how to use it in STEMCstudio. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was useful to you. If you do like the video, then please hit the like button below. And if you have some suggestions, things that you'd like to know more about, maybe more videos, then please put a comment below as well. If you want to see more videos like this and you want to be notified, hit the subscribe button. Again, that's below. And tell your friends. Until next time, happy coding. Bye-bye.